technically due tonight. I'll accept it later in the week, but you know, this is our last week, and I emailed a bunch of you guys about missing work, and so if you are missing any assignments, I emailed you about them. So if you didn't check your email, you should check it. And so look at Moodle and make sure you got grades for everything. I upgraded everything, or I updated all the grades this weekend, so we should be all caught up on stuff. So please take this last week to try to cross all the T's and dot the I's. If you're missing anything from previous weeks, now is the time to turn it in. Otherwise, you will get a 0. And of course, these forum posts, they are, you know, there is a lot of work involved. I don't mean to kind of belittle them. A lot of reading, a lot of thinking, but in the end, it's a relatively short assignment. So I encourage you to really try to do those if it's at all possible right now. Questions about assignments and stuff? We can also look at the prompts for the final paper. That's due in a week and a half. Hey, Brendan's wearing a suit. Welcome to class, Brendan. So, all right, now I have a live audience. I don't have to torture you guys. That's good. No, I can torture everybody in equal amounts. So yeah, we have the final paper due in about 10 days. I guess it's what, 9 days to be precise, which is a pretty good amount of time, but it's also you know, every day that number gets smaller. Welcome everybody. And so here are the 3 prompts. This is just my kind of synopsis of the prompts, but how would you tell Leah's family, or sorry, how would Leah's family tell her story? And you could tell that from the first person perspective. You could tell it from the third person perspective. What are the pronouns of the first person perspective? Here's a little high school English class, probably not even high school, but let's say middle school English class question. First person perspective pronouns, what are those? I, me, us, we. Yeah, exactly. So you could put yourself into the Lee family if you would like. It's a little more creative than the other ones. But I think it's actually kind of a difficult exercise in a way. So I encourage you to play with that if you feel like getting more creative. You know, we read Ann Fadiman's telling of the Lee family. We read a lot about Neil and Peggy and her doctor's perspective, but we don't get a ton of stories from them. So you can make one, right? So that would be a more sort of creative approach to this final assignment. All right, most people are here by now. Welcome, everybody. If you liked our discussions of caste, if you thought that was a cool book and you want to explore those themes further, Fadiman doesn't really do it, but she doesn't leave it out either, right? It's just a very detailed account. And so you could analyze themes of caste in the book. And then finally, we could go back to the Child Protective Services situation and think about, you know, in retrospect, knowing everything that we know, we can return to this question, right? Where when we first read it, a lot of us agreed that this was the best thing to do. And I wonder, you know, again, it's a very difficult situation, and we're gonna think about kind of the different emotions tied up with this situation and how it's hard to approach this with a level head. But you know, that's what you can do in this prompts too, is just return to this question of Child Protective Services that we discussed last week, knowing, you know, everything that we know, having finished the book this week. Do you have your opinions changed? Have your ideas changed? Do you have new thoughts on it? And so, yeah, lots of things you can do here. Questions about these prompts. And then there is a prompt number 4. I guess I can show this to you. I think I already opened it just a little while ago. Yeah, prompt number 4 is any other theme of your choosing, right? So if there's some other thing you think is interesting, you want to explore, go for it. But you got to tell me first, right? I don't want to open your essay on the day that it is due. Actually, wait, this is an older version of this assignment. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Sorry, here we go. Assignments, final paper. This is the version we want. Yeah. Oh, I still have the wrong date on it. What am I doing? Okay. Anyway, so the last day of class. So that is this week by 5/6, right? So tell me by 5/6. Any other theme? If you want to do it, just let me know, and I will probably say yes, and I'll help you come up with a plan. So, anyways, if you do choose number 4, tell me now. If you don't tell me this week, then forever hold your peace. So, questions about these prompts? Okay. Well, as you start to look at it, as you start to write your papers, feel free to get in touch, and I'm happy to give you feedback on your ideas. Oh yeah, also course evaluations, those are open now. They close on the 9th, so you've got about a week to do it. I guess it's a week from yesterday. And take them seriously. These are important. They go, obviously to me, but then also to my department chair and to whatever other administrators are curious. So, this is an important part of the semester. Just take it seriously, right? Give me meaningful feedback if you can, and please just be honest, right? Tell me what worked, what didn't work. Smartevals.com, and I think you guys get emails from the registrar, right? Which I think, what's her name, Carla Frazier, and they give you very detailed links you can follow too. So please do that. You got a week to do it. Okay, if there are no questions, and it seems that there are not, why don't we dive in? I've got a nice video from Ann Fadiman. I was thinking about assigning this, but it's too long and it's too kind of rambling. We're going to just watch a little part of it. Maybe I'll pause it before we start. Oh my God, so many things. So one thing I'm going to do is optimize the sound and get rid of these. So anyways, this is a conversation with Ann Fadiman, the author of Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, Monk Child and Her American Doctors. This is from Columbia University, right? The Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma. I'm not positive what that means, journalism and trauma, but I think it's something at the Columbia University Journalism School. It's, a premier journalism school in really anywhere, but in New York. And they are celebrating The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down 20 years after its publication. This was in 2017. So they are thinking about this book, around now. I guess this is already 4 years old now, but that's not terribly old by academic standards. And so again, it's our author, Ann Fadiman, reflecting on her book 20 years later and thinking about kind of its importance. I want to share with you one piece of writing advice. I think she's a very good writer. It's one reason I assigned this book. And one problem that you might encounter as you write your final paper is you're going to have way too much stuff to deal with, right? This is a big old book, tons of pages, tons of details, tons of ideas. How can you ever choose what pieces to include and what pieces not to include? Well, Ann Fadiman has some advice to you. Let's see what she has to say.
Cause difficulties, but that still bothers me. There are a couple of things like that. But, when you're deciding what to put in, you have to be really selective, because if you put in everything that's good, everything individually is good, but the pacing is wrong and the book is too long and you can't see the forest for the trees. So you have to force yourself. And so I'm going to bore my two former students here for a moment, but I would like to share with you a concept that has been very important in my classes. I think that this was after your time, Naja, but not after your time, Zara. So I have a friend, had a friend, a late friend, named Mark O'Donnell, who was a a marvelous humor writer, and he won a Tony for writing the book of Hairspray. And he grew up in Cleveland, and when he was growing up, he used to read every week My Weekly Reader, which is a children's magazine, sort of like highlights for children. Bruce is smiling, showing your age, Bruce, that you remember My Weekly Reader. And he told me once that he had read a riddle in My Weekly Reader, and the riddle was, Q, how do you sculpt a statue of David?
So let's pause here, because I realize that this might not be the most clear setup. So let me set it up for you. Q, so that's the question. How do you sculpt a statue, maybe it's not capital, statue of David? Now, do you know what statue this is referring to? What is a famous statue of David? Do you know what this is talking about? That's right. Michelangelo's David. Have you all seen this before? So it's Michelangelo, not the Ninja Turtle, but the person the Ninja Turtle is named after. It's made out of marble in 1501, between 1501 and 1504, very precise dates, right? So this is a very famous statue. Obviously, anatomically, it's incredible, right? You've got all the muscles and stuff going on. So how do you sculpt a statue of David, right? It's talking about this amazing work of art. And I promise this is talking about writing. We'll see. Okay, actually, I don't know that story. Did Michelangelo? Oh, the giant. Oh, yeah. Goliath. I see what you're saying. Yeah, David and Goliath. Yeah, so this is David from the Bible, exactly. So, yeah, what does this have to do with writing? Well, let's see.
A, it's easy. You take a block of marble and you remove everything that doesn't look like David.
Okay, and everybody laughs. I'll put this in the chat just so you guys are all, because again, I think this is actually very good advice. A, you take a block of marble and you remove everything that doesn't look like David. Now, of course, that's a joke, right? You guys know what a block of marble looks like? You probably haven't seen one, but it's this giant, block of marble that does not look like David, and you just take away all the marble that doesn't look like David. Very easy, right? What does this have to do with writing? Maybe I'll quiz you, but she'll elaborate, but I'll quiz you before she answers that question for us. What does that have to do with writing? This little kid's question. Well, you remove anything that's not related to your writing. Yeah, close. Not relating to your argument. Remove everything that's not related to your argument. You're trying to make a point, right? When you write a paper, you're trying to make a point. You're trying to say something. In this book, Ann Fadiman is trying to say something. And maybe an interesting exercise would be to discuss, what is she trying to say? You can think about that too, but let's listen to her. Let's see what she has to say about this kid's puzzle before we continue.
Well, as soon as he told me this, I thought, oh my God, this is just going to change everything. And if any of you ever use this, you cannot use this without properly ascribing it to Mark O'Donnell.
See, she cites her sources, guys. Just like I'm always on your case about citing your sources. She's also doing the same. I think she's a professor, so that might explain why.
He is not the ultimate source. Weekly Reader is the ultimate source, but I wouldn't know this without Mark. And I realized this is going to help me with my writing, and it's also going to help my students with their writing. So I think you need to ask yourself, what am I trying to say? And there might be a lot of really interesting material, but if it doesn't fall under the category of what I am trying to say, it doesn't look like David, and you have to remove the marble.
Yeah, so it's very simple, right? Think about, what am I trying to say? And again, as you approach your papers, do this, right? Think about, what do I want to say in this paper? And it could be small and very specific. It could be big and very grand. I encourage something maybe in between both of those. And I wish somebody had given me this advice, because this really comes down to just very practical communication skills, right? Think about, what is my argument, to use the prompt that I just showed you. What is my argument and how will I prove it, right? So that is exactly what I'm asking you to do. And so as you write this paper, think about this. What do I want to say, right? What do I want to say about this book? We've read it for a few weeks now, so hopefully you do have something to say about it. We've talked about it for weeks now as well. So that is my piece of writing advice to you, coming from Ann Fadiman, coming from Mark O'Donnell, coming from the Weekly Reader. That's actually a very complicated thing to cite at this point, right? It's going through many different sources. There's one more thing I want to show you too, and it comes at the minute mark number 53. And so this is a little easier to understand because the person is asking the question, and you can hear her question. Here we go.
Meg, hi, I'm Meg Kissinger, a visiting professor here. We had a great discussion about your book.
Oh,
and
thank you.
one of my favorite things actually was in the afterword that you wrote, and it's so beautiful. I just wanted to repeat it and ask you to comment on it. And you
Sure.
said, empathy is hard. It's harder than anger. It's harder than pity.
Yeah, boy, pity is really easy. Those poor Hmong. Oh my God, aren't they poor? They lost everything and we really screwed them. That is so easy. Um, Anger is easy. I did spend some time being angry at my characters. I mean, I spent so many years. There would be periods when I'd sort of want to, shake Fu by the shoulders and say, why didn't you realize that the doctors were so well intentioned? And then I certainly wanted to shake the doctors by the shoulders and say, there were some other things you could have done, and foster care. But mostly, I wasn't angry at the characters. It would just be little brief storms. My essential extreme affection for both sides would come out a few days later. But I was really angry at the United States, really, really angry. And in our current refugee crisis, it's almost like having an anniversary reaction to the traumatic death of someone you love. A lot of my feelings of anger at my country for what they did to the Hmong and how they screwed up their resettlement have been just, kind of unbidden, just sort of seeping out and making me feel angry again. So anyway, those feelings are easy. They just come. You don't have to make them happen. And sometimes, in fact, you try to make them not happen. Empathy is hard because it's different from sympathy. I mean, you really have to put yourself into the other person's point of view. And that is not so easy, especially with the Lees, because they're just so different from me. I come from this super intellectual, rational family where all problems could be solved by being cerebral. And Neil and Peggy were cerebral, and they failed in solving that problem. So, in order to see things from the Lee's point of view, I had to give up a lot of the things that I'd clung to my entire life, that were sort of my bulwark, that made me feel safe and strong. I realized that there are a lot of situations in which they're just completely worthless. Um, and I also, I guess, feel that many of the world's problems couldn't exactly be solved, but would be much improved via empathy. I mean, I don't think it's a panacea, but I do think that it helps. And I think that many people confuse it with pity. And when people pity other people, there's immediately a hierarchy, and the pitier is always higher than the pitee. And the point about empathy is that by very definition, you have to be exactly on the same level because you're aligned.
Thank you.
Can I ask a
Okay, and there is a follow-up question, and they continue talking about it, but I'm going to cut it off there. So that is Ann Fadiman, and you're welcome to watch this whole interview if you are interested. The link is in the slides. All right, so let's talk about this. We have read most of this book now. We're not quite done with it. We will finish it this week. And there is, just again, to put it in context, there is this collision of two cultures. That is what this book is about. That's what we've been studying for so long, and we've been discussing for so many weeks. And the question comes up, how do you move forward, right? How do we kind of break out from this collision of two cultures? I asked you guys to write about this in your forum posts, right? And a lot of you had some really insightful things to say. And Fatiman is giving us advice here. She's saying, pity is easy, anger is easy, empathy is hard. And maybe she sort of said this for us, but I want to hear you guys think about it. How is pity different from empathy? I think anger is very different from empathy. I think we all understand that. But pity is often confused for empathy, I think, right? So what, can anybody differentiate those two concepts for us, those two words? Pity versus empathy. Have you guys ever pitied someone before? What does it mean to pity someone? Mr. T pities the fool, right? He does pity the fool. I pity the fool. He doesn't read this book. It's a good book. So yeah, what does it mean to pity someone? How is that different from empathy? Okay, so Colin said it's to feel remorse for someone. Yeah, that's true. And I think you could feel remorse for someone with empathy. So how do we draw a line between these two things? How do we separate them out? Pity is a feeling of discomfort. Okay. So we're uncomfortable, maybe because we can see someone else is uncomfortable. We feel uncomfortable for them. But again, I think we could say the same for empathy. So we got to figure out how to draw them apart from each other. Fatiman says pity is easy and empathy is hard. Why is pity easier than empathy? It's sort of, these are hard questions, right? And part of it is like you could look up the words in the dictionary, but a lot of it comes down to your own experience, right? What have your experiences with these concepts been like? We could look them up in the dictionary. Let's look them up. So feeling of sorrow, compassion caused by the suffering, misfortune of others. Okay. Regret, disappointment. But yeah, I think it's this first one. And then what about this one? Empathy, ability to understand and share the feelings of another. So pretty close, right? This one is also sharing the feelings of another. Feeling of sorrow and compassion caused by the suffering, misfortunes of others. But when Fatiman was using it, she was saying there's an important differentiation between the two. She talked about the pitier and the pity-e. And I noticed the subtitles were pretty bad. I don't know if you could tell, but they didn't quite capture her inflection there. So of course, a pitier is talking about the person doing the pity versus the person receiving the pity. What was she talking about there? The pitier versus the pity-e. What's the difference between someone who pities someone else and someone who receives that pity? There is a difference, and I think this is getting to the key of her point here. Should I play it again? We could play it again. I think it's toward the end of the conversation. I'll rewind a little bit, and if we hear it, then good. If not, then we'll forget it.
Ask a follow-up question to that? There's immediately a hierarchy, and the pitier is always higher than the pity-e. And the point about empathy is that by very definition, you have to be exactly on the same level because...
You guys catch that? The pity-her is higher up than the pity-e, right? So, you know, an example is like COVID in India. Have you guys been following the story of COVID in India? How's India doing right now? Lots of death, right? Lots of problems in India. If you know anybody who has family in India, they are probably very stressed out right now, right? Even if their family's not sick, it's just like, it's like New York, you know, 13 months ago, you know, a little bit more than a year ago. It is, but even worse, right? The hospitals are totally maxed out. People are dying. Resources are scarce. Like it is a tough time in India right now, and it's easy to pity them, right? We can think, I'm vaccinated. I'm having a good time now. You're right. The spring is coming. Everything's great. Hot Professor Summer is on the way. And so we can think about how life is very comfortable here for me. I'm so good. I'm so nice. My life is so good. Whereas in India, they are suffering so immensely. And there is a bit of a separation between me and the people who are in India right now. Can you see that? It doesn't have to be that way, but that's often how it is thought about, reported, conceived in, let's just say, in the news these days. So what would the difference be between what I just talked about, this sense of pity and a real empathy with what's happening in India right now? How can I develop more empathy for people who are suffering there? Or what would that look like? What's the difference between empathy and pity? Empathy we've actually seen before, haven't we? Didn't when we talk about caste, remember that? Ways of sort of breaking down these walls between people. When Wilkerson was talking to the guy working on her sump pump, right? She evoked this language of empathy, didn't she? Maybe as we think about empathy, we can move to this next question. Why is empathy difficult in the practice of medicine and healthcare? You guys are not very lively today. All right, maybe I'm going to let this person who is interviewing Fadiman ask her
Do
follow-up
think that it helps, and I think
question.
that many people confuse it with pity. And when people pity other people, there's immediately a hierarchy, and the pitier is always higher than the pitiee. And the point about empathy is that by very definition,
Too much empathy? Is there such a thing as?
Thank you.
Can I ask?
So here's the follow-up question, and it's basically what I'm asking you guys here, but because you all seem a bit distracted today, we can let the video do some talking. So empathy in a medical setting can only take you so far, right? Take me for example. I'm a professor. I'm like, hey, let's talk about disease and health and suffering and helping people and all that sort of stuff. But it's all very abstract, right? If I were really a doctor and I felt a deep sense of empathy for everybody I met, that would be hard, right? I meet a lot of sick people if I'm a doctor. I might even have to do surgery on people, right? If I'm thinking about them as like living, breathing people with families and emotions and feelings and all that sort of stuff, that might mess with my job. I might not be able to do as good of a job as I would otherwise. And so that's kind of what is being asked about here is, can there be too much empathy in the health profession, and why might it lead to a sense of burnout, especially for like social workers and therapists and these sorts of people? How do they kind of draw these boundaries, and why do they have to draw them? So let's see what they have to say about this.
Ask a follow-up question to that.
sure,
Isn't empathy also dangerous sometimes? Too much empathy? Is there such a thing as excessive empathy or errors of judgment or perception
no, I think that
because of being too empathetic?
I think you can burn out because when you're feeling empathy, you're taking other people's problems onto yourself. It can certainly happen for journalists. It can certainly also happen for doctors. But I think that in terms of writing good journalism, that excessive sympathy is a greater danger than excessive empathy. I'm not sure that, I mean, again, if you're writing a news story, that's an entirely different kettle of fish, because empathy ruins your objectivity because it puts you inside that other person. But when you're writing the whatever genre this is, I don't think that empathy ever caused any problems. I think that pity causes enormous problems.
So she doesn't quite get into the burnout stuff. She mentioned it a little bit, but she doesn't explore it too much. So perhaps I can leave it at that. But for those of you who are thinking about professions in the healthcare world, in the therapy world, I was actually talking to a friend who is a therapist yesterday. So that's one reason I was thinking about it, about burnout. And this is a major issue, right? It's just people get overwhelmed with the problems of their patients. Empathy is feeling and actually being on the same level as the person suffering, while pity is more feeling bad, but not necessarily feeling the same way as the person suffering. Yeah, that's very nicely said, Leo. Thank you very much for that. And so, yeah, you could see, to build on Leo's very nice explanation here, if we are on the same level as a person suffering and we are surrounded by suffering all the time, that could really lead to burnout. Where we just feel overwhelmed by all the suffering around us, right? Frankly, if I worked in a health profession and I, let's just say, came close to this at one point in my life, or I was thinking about it, I think I would burn out. It would just be too much for me to be surrounded by all the pain and the suffering and all this sort of thing. I would have to figure out a way to be less empathetic, right? I could not bring my empathy into the hospital. It would be overwhelming. Yeah, and it can lead to malpractice. That's true, right? I would be less effective at my job. And so as we think about what happened in this book, we can actually begin to sort of understand how these sorts of things happen. One thing that Fadiman says too is that pity and anger are easy. I thought that was a very insightful way of putting this. You know, when we fall into these patterns of blame, right? These kind of narratives of blame. And this is something we've talked about earlier in the class, but we can say, you know, those doctors did something wrong, or maybe those parents did something wrong. It's all their fault. And you can choose either side you want to blame, right? But the end result is kind of the same. Somebody is doing something wrong, and then somebody is a victim, and we can say those poor victims, just like Ann Fadiman is saying. And this is something I want to draw your attention to, because we are surrounded by narratives of blame, right? We are drowning in these sorts of narratives where we get angry at the aggressor and we feel bad for the victim. This really kind of dominates the way people think about society in America right now. The difference is just who do you blame? But pretty much everybody's blaming somebody. And so these are really easy patterns to fall into. What Fadiman is talking about, empathy, and what Leo explained nicely and Collins was thinking about too, that is actually really hard. It is really hard to feel somebody on the same level, right? To feel on the same level of a person who is suffering, to share in that suffering with that person. Because frankly, most of us don't want to do that, right? And so we would rather kind of build up this wall and step away from it. Okay, maybe that's enough on that, but this is important, right? Because it ties in with what you guys wrote about last week, right? On your forum posts. It ties in with this entire book. And in some ways, it answers the question of what should we do about this collision? Fadiman is saying the answer really is empathy is understanding. And we could argue that is her thesis, right? That is what this book is about, is trying to understand two sides of a very difficult conversation about this young girl. There's more we can do, though. So here is a set of 8 questions. And this is kind of the main part of today's class, is I want to talk about these 8 questions. They're from this guy, Arthur Kleinman. He is a very impressive person. He's a doctor. He's an anthropologist. So he has an MD and a PhD. As you can see, he's a little bit older. He was born in the early 40s. So he is retired now. I'm pretty sure he's still alive. I hate to put it that way, but I'm pretty sure he's still alive. He was at Harvard Medical School. He was one of the first teachers to talk about medical humanities from an anthropological perspective. So he's a very interesting and important guy. Again, if you're interested in healthcare, he's a good person to think about, a good person to know. And today, we are going to explore some of his ideas. So page 260 to 261 is the section of the book. And I've even made a little worksheet for you all to go through these questions. So here you go. Please open this link up. And I designed this to just give you a chance to look at these questions without any answers to them. So you can begin to think about kind of what What do they mean? What do they do? What are their implications? Can you guys open this? Actually, I don't know if I messed with the settings. Is this like shareable? Yeah, some of you guys are coming. Okay. What is this? A snake? Yeah, anonymous dragon. All right, very good. So an anonymous dragon is here. I don't know if you guys are aware, but I can tell how many people are opening the link, and there's all of one at this point. So again, it's part of a theme these days. Okay, yeah, here they come. We got the anonymous giraffe and bear and tiger. Very nice. So welcome to the Word doc. This link will disappear once I send you off into breakout rooms. So please do open it up now. And what I want you to do is go through these questions and kind of think about what they are, right? What do you call the problem? Of course, this is for a patient, someone who is sick. And you could also ask these same questions of a doctor, right? So we could ask Neil and Peggy, think about how they would respond, but we could also ask the members of the Lee family and think about how they would respond. So if you want to do that first prompt, this would actually be a decent place to start, is to start with answers to these questions. And one thing I want to show you too is, this is what Ann Fadiman says about it. She says, and again, she's a very bright person. She's a very bright author, very sharp person. For me, it is asking for permission. Oh, okay. Maybe you have to be a member of Manhattan College. I don't know. Well, if you try switching your account, Kevin, and see if you can come through on your Manhattan College email. If you can't get it though, I will we'll come up with a workaround. So here's what Fadiman says with it. She says, the first few times I read these questions, they seem so obvious, I hardly notice them. And so when you first look at them, you will probably think, these questions are not that interesting. They're very obvious. Who cares? But around the 50th time, and so she spent some time on this, she began to think that, like many obvious things, they might actually be a work of genius. So this is something I want you to think about too, is why is Fadiman calling this a work of genius? This seems very obvious and very simple at first. What might be genius about it? What do these questions do? All right, so that is my question for you. Do you guys have any questions for me about these questions that I'm asking you to discuss? It's a lot of questions. Does that sound good? That no one was able to talk. Did you guys come up with anything? Any good conversations? Chris and I talked about graduation a little bit. That was a good conversation. It didn't really relate to these questions. That's okay. Good conversation. Still a good conversation. So, all right, let's work through this together. Here's a very simple little softball question to see if anybody else is out there. How would the Lee family answer this first question? What do you call the problem, right? How would the Lee family answer this question? The spirit caught Leah and she fell down. Yes, Eric knows. Exactly, yeah. Now, of course, a doctor would say epilepsy. And this is something we've explored from day number 1, right? There are 2 different answers to this question. Is either one the right answer? According to this formulation, no. Neither one of them is the right answer. They're both just answers to the same question, right? What do you call the problem? The doctor will call it epilepsy. The Lee family will call it the spirit catches you and you fall down. What do you think has caused the problem? How would the Lee family answer this question? And if you don't know, it's in the book. So again, Fadiman did the same sort of exercise we're doing now. In the book, she wrote soul loss, but we could actually think about it in a slightly different way too. How would the Lee family explain what caused the problem? And this is something, again, if you want to do that first prompt, this is something you can explore. How would they explain it? Remember we did the soul calling ritual and I drew like kind of that ridiculous diagram on the board, remember that? What caused the problem for Leah Lee? Her sister slammed the door. Yeah, I think that's actually number 3. Why did it start when it did? But yes, the sister slammed the door. It caused her soul to get lost. Maybe an evil spirit grabbed it, right? So that's this term kaudape, the spirit catches you and you fall down. So we have all these different answers. We have different answers for treatments, right? We discussed that before. And again, when we form these as just answers to questions, and different people have different answers to questions, they kind of enter into the realm of, I don't know, dare I say something like opinion, right? Now, I don't mean to say that all of these answers to these questions have the exact same value. Maybe we can put different value on these different answers, but in the end, they are just answers to these same questions. So with this idea in mind, we can kind of return this to this idea of genius. What is the genius behind these 8 questions? Can you begin to see it now? Let me, as you're thinking about it, because again, it's a hard question, right? Fadiman, she had to read them 50 times in order to really see the genius. So we probably only read them once or twice. There's a third part to this that I actually kind of wish I had turned into a full slide, but I'll read it to you and we can explore it together. On page 261, please read with me. So Fadiman called him, the author called Arthur Kleinman and asked him for suggestions about what the Lee family could have done differently in this situation. And he said, I have 3. First, get rid of the term compliance. So first he says he doesn't like, I'm going to make it go like this, X, compliance. X. The X means he doesn't like it. He says, get rid of the term compliance. It's a lousy term. It implies moral hegemony. You probably don't know what that means. Does anybody know what hegemony means? Hegemony. So it refers to power, right? It means one group has power over another group. Leadership or dominance, especially by one country or social group over others. Yeah, exactly. So dominance of one group over the other. So who is in power here with this language of compliance? The doctors, right? The doctors are in power and they're saying, you must comply with what we say. So it implies moral hegemony. You don't want a command from a general, you want a colloquy, right? A conversation. Second, so here's the second advice, the second suggestion. Second, instead of looking for a model of coercion, look at a model of mediation. And so what does that mean? He explains, go find a member of the Hmong community or find a medical anthropologist who can help you negotiate. Remember that a stance of mediation, like a divorce proceeding, requires compromise on both sides, decide what is critical, and be willing to compromise on everything else. Okay, so mediation, compromise is another part of that. Okay, and number 3, he talks about you need to understand that as powerful an influence as the culture of the Hmong patient and her family is on this case, the culture of biomedicine, I'll type this one out, culture of biomedicine is equally powerful. If you can't see that your own culture has its own set of interests, emotions, and biases, how can you expect to deal successfully with someone else's culture? And so this last one, I think we don't have that much time for today, but we'll return to this next time, is this idea that the medicine that is often practiced at a hospital called biomedicine has a culture. It is a culture, right? And to not see it as a culture, again, I'll read him saying this. If you can't see that your own culture has its own set of interests, emotions, and biases, how can you expect to deal successfully with someone else's culture? It's a very powerful statement, right? And if we come back to these questions, it is essentially a demonstration of these 3 values, right? It is saying that answers to these questions are at the level of culture. They might be backed up by data, right? That definitely happens. They might be backed up by research and science, for sure. But at the same time, they still are words that come out of our mouth, right? What do you call that disease that causes you to shake? Epilepsy. That is a word, right? And that is a word that is in terms of its linguistic reality, is no different from the spirit catches you and you fall down. They point at different concepts, but they both exist at the language of, or at the level of language, right? And so what these questions do is they kind of break down these walls, these hierarchies, this moral hegemony that he was just talking about. Rather than one group, one answer being correct and the other having to comply with that first answer, these questions open up room for conversation, right? For mediation, for compromise. We can ask the Lee family about what they think and maybe even give some weight to what they think, right? And even if it is different from what the doctor says, it allows room for conversation, right? It is saying, let's put these two ideas in conversation with each other, rather than just saying, no, there's only one idea that can be on this table, right? And then finally, again, this culture of biomedicine, by looking at the answers that maybe Neil and Peggy would give to these questions, we can begin to think, well, what is the culture of biomedicine? And why do they give the answers that they give? And again, there might be scientific reasons and research reasons in other regions, but those are all part of this culture of biomedicine, or at least that's what Arthur Kleinman is calling it. And again, he is from this culture. He is an MD, PhD. He is a doctor, right? He is a doctor who happens to be an anthropologist. So if anybody can talk about this culture, it really is him. So we'll get to that last part on Thursday. And again, coming back to Fadiman's thing, you know, it's not to say that one is to blame and one is a victim or something like this. Really, what these questions also help us do is empathize, right? Is to see where somebody else is coming from in a way that is very difficult to do. As we said, it is hard to be empathetic, and here are tools to achieve it. So hopefully you can see the genius behind these questions now. Do you have any questions about the questions? So as you are thinking about these prompts, these questions will help you, right? Like, let's say I want to do this first prompt, go to page 260 and go through those answers and try to incorporate this into your story, because I think it'll make it a better story. Themes of caste, you can think about these ideas of compliance. Why does one group have to comply with the other group, right? What does that have to do with caste? Again, the Child Protective Services thing, were they able to use these tools of question and answer? Were they able to ask these sorts of questions of the Lee family? And why didn't they, right? And how did that affect the outcome of that situation? I think for all of these prompts, we could come back to these questions. I totally agree that they are a work of genius, but you'll have to keep thinking about them. So I encourage you to keep thinking about them. Again, we'll come back to this culture of American medicine next time. Let's think about what happened to Leah Lee. So you all might be wondering, last time I sort of hinted at the big one, and again, I'm gonna have to probably kick that can down the road. But what happened to Leah Lee? As in the chapter we read for today, it was a pretty short chapter, but lots of ideas going on. Leah Lee did not die, nor did she recover. That's the first sentence of page 250. Leah Lee did not die, nor did she recover. Again, that chapter we read previously last week. We haven't really discussed it yet. She has a grand mal seizure, right? She has a really intense, giant seizure. She gets really sick. She has brain damage. And as a result, she comes close to death, right? In fact, the hospital basically says that she died. They basically treat her as if she had died because she had brain damage. But at the same time, despite being brain damaged, she still managed to live until 2012, right? So I think it's 20, how many years? Many years. I gave the number somewhere. Yeah, till the age of 30. So I think she was born, I guess, in 82, if you do the math. Yeah, and a good majority of her life, 20 plus years, were spent in this brain damaged state, just like she is in this picture here. And so it's a kind of a confusing end to the story, right? Because when this book was written, when it was first published, she was very much alive, right? In 1997, she still lived for 15 years beyond the writing of this book. And when this book was published, or when the new edition was published, it was actually in 2012. And so I think when the afterword was written, she was actually still alive. So you can look up, there's a New Yorker memorial for her. If you want to read more about kind of the last year of her life, you can read more. And so she did not die. She did not recover. She lived in this sort of in-between state for a vast majority of her life. There were conversations about blame, right? We remember this sort of being angry and pitying. It's very easy to pity her and feel like, poor Leah Lee, if only her parents had given her the medicine. This is a quote from somebody, I think it's a nurse's aide on 254. Yeah, if only the parents had given Leah medicine, she wouldn't be like this. I bet when she came back from the foster home, they just didn't give her any medicine, which is, again, it's tempting to fall into that trap, right? But it is a trap because, as we know, we talked about this in a lot of detail, the parents did give her the medicine. They did take care of her. Not only did they give her the medicine, they gave her all the medicines they possibly could give her, right? They gave her the cupping and the shaman and all these other sorts of herbs and tinctures and all sorts of stuff. So to blame this on the parents is really just coming from this space of, well, non-compliance, right? This idea that it's because they didn't comply. That is why she is sick, because if they had only complied, maybe she wouldn't get so sick. And maybe there's a certain degree of truth here. If they had complied from like day number 1, let's see, can I find that part? There's a part where Fadiman reflects on this. I don't know if I can find it. Yeah, I don't think I can find it. But basically, Fadiman said something to the degree like, maybe if they had complied from day number 1, and maybe if the doctors had given her Depakine, right, which is that medicine that was easier for the parents to give to her, or maybe if they had gotten some sort of social worker to come in. And again, these are all coming from this space of anger and pity and just feeling like she is a total victim. But she didn't get sick because of her parents, and she didn't get sick because of her doctors, right? She was just born sick. In some ways, this is a frustrating example of blamelessness, right? This is a situation where no one is really to blame. The parents could have done better, and frankly, the doctors could have done better. Both sides could have done better. And as a result, you know, again, she was sick. In some ways, medicine, yeah, this was also another line. I'll read it to you. I don't think it's on the slide. But it was also true that if the Lees were still in Laos, well, actually, there's more to the top, but I'll just skip that. Leah would probably have died before she was out of her infancy from a prolonged bout of untreated status epilepticus, right? So, or epilepticus. So this is all just to say, if it weren't for this biomedicine that, you know, again, kind of compromised her immune system and made her ultimately more sick than she would have been, she would have just died immediately. American medicine had both preserved her life and compromised it. I was unsure which had hurt her family more. And we can play the blame game, right? I'm sure you guys have played various blame games before. Lots of people love to play the blame game, but this is too simple. To blame mom and dad for this is just totally unfair to them. This thing about compromising. The Depakine might have compromised her immune system, right? What ended up happening with the grand mal seizure, for those of you who are interested in medical stuff, she had sepsis. Septic shock, I think is the technical term, where she got an infection for some reason, which actually they never quite figured out. But because she had taken this Depakine, her immune system was compromised. Obviously, if she did not take the Depakine, she would have had a bunch of seizures. So, and Fadiman comes out and she writes in italics that the Lee family was right. She had taken too much medicine. I think it was, yeah, there it is, on page 255. So she learns that, you know, her immune system had been compromised, the Depakine, yeah, she talks to the specialist. I still believe Depakine was a drug of choice. I would prescribe it again, but in fact, if the family was giving her Depakine as instructed, it's conceivable that by following our instructions, they set her up for septic shock. And then Fadiman thinks about this, and she says, the leaves were right after all. Leah's medicine did make her sick. So again, without the medicine, she would have died, but with the medicine, she also was put into septic shock and it compromised her immune system. And so she went into this state. When she finally came to MCMC, the Merced County Medical Center, everybody just thought, oh, she's having another seizure. That's kind of what her deal is she has seizures. Nobody thought that maybe she also had an infection. Nobody really kind of looked into this. And then when she finally did get the brain damage, everybody talked about her as if she were dead. But she did not die, right? She did not die for 20-something years, right? Until 2012. So she lived a very long life. And to be clear, how did she live a very long life? And I hate to break your heart, but it's because of her. It's because of her family, right? Her mom took care of her like a professional would. She turned her in her bed, she bathed her. And I don't know very much about home care, but the very limited amount I do know about home care, this would be a very difficult person to care for, right? To feed them, to bathe them, to clothe them. I have enough trouble feeding and clothing myself, right? And so to totally full-time take care of this young girl until she grows to be 30 years old is just an incredible act of love and devotion coming from a mother whose heart was broken when her little daughter finally did pass away. So it's an incredible act of love. So again, to hear this blaming of the parents, it breaks my heart. But of course, it just shows that this person is falling into these easy traps of these blame narratives. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Maybe we can kind of summarize these thoughts, connect it to the Yellow Rain episode. Just like in the Yellow Rain episode, we could think, all right, the real truth is the bee poop, right? And this thing about Hmong people getting killed was just sort of confusion. If we go back to these questions, right, we could ask Jad Abumrad and Robert Krulwich questions. We could say, what do you think happened? We could ask Eng Yang, what do you think happened? And rather than valuing one over the other and saying one is the objective truth and the other is just some sort of illusion, we can see that these are both sides of the same truth, right? We can talk about how he experienced it. It doesn't mean it's objectively, factually correct, but it is how he experienced this, and that is something valuable to tease out of the situation, right? The same could be done with Leah Lee, right? We might assume that because the parents didn't comply with the doctor's orders that the girl got sick, but of course, that is just an assumption, and this book was dedicated to the fact that, well, that assumption is wrong, right? Both of these assumptions are wrong. People did die in Laos, and Leah Lee did, in fact, not die. How did she not die? Is because the parents took such good care of her. That is how she lived for 26 years with brain damage, right? There's no other explanation. Most people shrivel up and die after they have brain damage because of sentiments like this. They're treated as if they are already dead. And it was only the love of her parents that kept her alive. Okay, we've got less than 5 minutes. We could start to go through this. I think maybe it's not even worth doing. Why don't we hold it off until next time? We'll go over the big one. We'll kind of go over the facts of the matter, what really happened to Leah Lee, and then we can kind of wrap it all up with one final analysis. How does that sound? So we'll end just a few minutes early today. I'm sure that you will all be fine if we do that, right?